Her name was Clara, and her world smelled of stale coffee and bleach. Each morning she'd tie the strings of her faded grey apron, and the knot felt like a small anchor holding her in place. The Corner Spoon Diner wasn't a career. It was a raft in the middle of a choppy sea. It kept her afloat. It paid for the small apartment she shared with her younger brother, Leo, and for the mountain of textbooks he needed for his college classes. Clara's own dreams were tucked away, folded neatly like the paper napkins she refilled 100 times a day. They were dreams of being an artist, of sketching faces that told stories, but charcoal sticks and sketch pads didn't pay the rent. So she sketched stories in her mind instead. She saw the quiet hope in the eyes of the old man, who ordered the same black coffee every day. She saw the nervous energy of the young couple on their first date, their fingers barely touching over the salt shaker. She saw life in all its messy, beautiful detail. Her hands were often sore, her feet ached, but her spirit had a strange resilience. It was a quiet strength, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that gets you through another double shift. Leo always told her she was the strongest person he knew. He saw the sacrifice in every plate she carried, in every tired smile she offered a customer. "One day, Clara," he'd say, his eyes bright with the future she was building for him, "I'll get my degree, and you'll never have to refill another ketchup bottle again. You'll just draw." She'd laugh, ruffling his hair. For her, that single thought was worth more than all the tips in her jar combined. It was the fuel that kept her going when exhaustion settled deep in her bones. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a guardian, a provider, a silent artist painting a future for someone else. She believed in kindness, in the simple power of a warm meal and a gentle word. She treated every person who walked through the diner's door with a respect that life hadn't always shown her. She believed that deep down everyone was fighting a battle of their own, and a little bit of grace could be a powerful shield. She moved through the diner with an easy rhythm, a dance of efficiency and empathy. She remembered the regulars' orders, knew which kids liked extra cherries in their sodas, and always had a patient ear for the lonely souls who just needed to talk. Her apron might have been empty of tips some nights, but her heart was always full. She found richness in small moments, a currency that couldn't be spent, but could be felt. But she knew in the back of her mind that the world was not always a kind place. She knew that some people measured worth by the cost of your shoes or the brand of your car. She just never expected that world to come crashing so violently into her own. She was about to learn that some storms don't knock on the door, they kick it down. The bell above the door chimed, but it sounded different this time. It wasn't the cheerful jingle of a regular or the hurried clang of a construction worker on his lunch break. This was a slow, deliberate sound, as if the person entering expected the world to pause for them, and in a way it did. Her name was Eleanor Davenport. She wasn't just a customer, she was an event. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silver coat that seemed to shimmer with its own cold light, even in the diner's warm, greasy air. Her hair was perfectly styled, a helmet of blonde ambition. Her face was a mask of bored indifference, her eyes scanning the humble surroundings as if she were a queen inspecting the squalor of her subjects. Every customer in the Corner Spoon felt her presence. Conversations faltered. Forks paused halfway to mouths. It was the kind of silence that follows a predator entering a forest. She moved toward an empty booth, not walking but gliding, her expensive leather boots making no sound on the checkered floor. Clara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. It was an old, familiar feeling. The feeling of being small, of being judged. She grabbed a menu and a glass of water, took a deep breath, and walked toward the booth, her professional smile firmly in place. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome to the Corner Spoon," Clara said, her voice even and calm. Eleanor didn't look up. She was busy wiping the already clean table with a silk handkerchief she'd pulled from her designer purse. "Is this the best you have?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. The question hung in the air, sharp and cruel. It wasn't just about the table, it was about the diner, the people in it, and the woman standing before her. Clara kept her smile intact. "It's our coziest booth. The view of the street is quite nice." Eleanor finally lifted her eyes. They were cold, like chips of ice. She looked Clara up and down, a slow insulting appraisal. She noted the worn-out shoes, the faded apron, the hands that were clean but clearly used to hard work. In that single glance, Eleanor decided everything she needed to know about Clara. She was nobody, a stepping stone, a faceless servant in a world where Eleanor was the star. "Just get me a black coffee, and make sure the cup is actually clean," she ordered, dismissing Clara with a flick of her wrist. As Clara walked away, she could feel Eleanor's eyes on her back, a physical weight of judgment. She knew this wouldn't be an easy order. This woman wasn't here for coffee. She was here to remind the world, and everyone in it, of her own superiority. She was a person who built herself up by tearing others down, who felt powerful only when someone else felt small. And Clara, in her simple grey apron, was the perfect target for her casual cruelty. Clara delivered the coffee, placing it gently on the table. "Here you are, ma'am. Let me know if you need anything else." She turned to walk away, but Eleanor's voice sliced through the air. "Excuse me." Clara turned back. "Yes?" Eleanor stared at the coffee, then back at Clara, a theatrical look of disgust on her face. "What is this?" she asked, her voice rising just enough to capture the attention of the surrounding tables. "It's your coffee," Clara replied, confused. "No," Eleanor said, shaking her head slowly. "This is an insult." She dipped her finger into the coffee, then recoiled as if it were acid. "It's lukewarm. Do you people not understand the concept of hot coffee, or is that too complicated for you?" The accusation was absurd. The coffee was fresh, steam still curling from the cup, but Clara knew it wasn't about the temperature. It was about power. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. I can get you a fresh pot right away." "Don't bother," Eleanor sneered, her voice now a public proclamation. She stood up, her silver coat falling perfectly around her. "I should have known better than to expect competence in a place like this." She looked around the diner, her gaze landing on the other customers, making them all complicit in her judgment. "You people," she said, the words dripping with venom, "are content to live in mediocrity. You wake up, you serve your little coffees, you go home. A meaningless, pathetic cycle." Clara's face burned with shame. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She wanted to be invisible, but Eleanor wasn't finished. She looked directly at Clara, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Look at you, wasting your youth in this grease pit. Do you have any ambition, any dreams, or is this it? Is this the best you'll ever be?" Every word was a deliberate cut, designed to inflict the most pain. Then came the final, soul-crushing gesture. Eleanor reached into her purse, pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, and threw it onto the floor at Clara's feet. The bill landed next to her worn-out shoe. "Here," Eleanor said, her voice loud and clear for everyone to hear. "Maybe you can buy yourself some dignity, though I doubt it's for sale." The diner was tomb silent. No one moved. No one spoke. They just watched as Clara stood there, frozen, the world collapsing around her. All she could see was that crumpled bill on the dirty floor. It wasn't money. It was a symbol of her worth in this woman's eyes. It was nothing, less than nothing. In that moment, something inside Clara didn't just break. It shattered. Eleanor Davenport swept out of the diner, leaving a wake of stunned silence and humiliation. The bell on the door chimed her departure, the sound mocking the funeral-like atmosphere she left behind. For a long moment, no one moved. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Clara just stood there, staring at the floor. The checkered pattern of the tiles seemed to blur, the black and white squares swimming in her vision. The $5 bill lay there, a crumpled green insult. She could feel the eyes of every customer on her. They weren't hostile eyes, not like Eleanor's. They were filled with pity, and somehow that felt even worse. Pity was a confirmation of her powerlessness. She was the poor waitress who had been put in her place, a story they would tell their friends later. "You won't believe what happened at the diner today." Her boss, a gruff man named Sal, finally emerged from the kitchen. He had heard everything. He walked over, looked at Clara, then at the bill on the floor. He sighed, a tired, defeated sound. "Just clean it up, Clara," he said, his voice low. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He couldn't afford to lose a wealthy customer, even a monstrous one. The customer was always right, even when they were wrong, especially when they were wrong. That was the rule. So Clara bent down. Her movements were slow, robotic. Her back ached as she lowered herself, not from the work, but from the weight of the shame. Her fingers, trembling slightly, closed around the crumpled bill. It felt dirty, tainted. She stood up and walked to her station, her legs feeling like lead. She didn't cry. The tears were stuck somewhere deep inside, a frozen block of grief in her chest. She just went back to work. She refilled the salt shakers. She wiped down the counter. She took an order for a cheeseburger and fries. She moved through the motions of her job, but she was hollowed out, a ghost in a grey apron. The rest of the shift was a blur. The sounds of the diner, the clatter of plates, the sizzle of the grill, the low hum of conversation, all seemed distant, like she was listening to them from underwater. When her shift finally ended, she took off her apron, folded it, and placed it on the shelf. It felt heavier than usual. She walked out into the cold night air, the crumpled $5 bill still clutched in her hand. It was a scar, a reminder. She had been told what she was worth, and a part of her, the exhausted, broken part, had started to believe it. She walked past a dimly lit thrift store, and something in the window caught her eye, a small act of defiance beginning to stir in her shattered heart. The thrift store was a museum of forgotten things. Mismatched teacups, dusty lamps, coats that held the faint scent of strangers. Clara usually walked right by, her mind on getting home to Leo, on the dinner she needed to cook. But tonight, her feet stopped. In the cluttered window display, nestled between a porcelain doll with a cracked face and a stack of yellowed books, was a small wooden box. It was simple, unadorned, made of a dark, worn-out wood. There was nothing special about it. It wasn't shiny or valuable. But in that moment, it was the only thing in the world she saw. She didn't know why, but she felt a pull, a strange kinship with this discarded object. It looked as lonely and overlooked as she felt. The $5 bill in her hand suddenly felt hot. It was tainted money, money meant to humiliate her. She couldn't use it for groceries or bills. It felt wrong. Using it for something as random and useless as an old wooden box, however, felt right. It felt like a small rebellion, a way of saying, "You don't get to decide what I do. You don't get to define my choices." She pushed open the creaky door of the shop. An old man with kind eyes looked up from his newspaper. "Can I help you, young lady?" he asked gently. "The box," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "The one in the window. How much is it?" The man smiled. "Ah, the old thing. No one's ever asked about that before. It's been here for years." He shuffled to the window, retrieved the box, and placed it on the counter. "Tell you what," he said, seeing the deep sadness in her eyes. "For you, $5. It was a coincidence, but it felt like fate." Clara smoothed the crumpled bill on the counter. It was the exact price. She slid the bill across the wood, a transaction that felt more significant than its monetary value. She was trading her humiliation for something else, something unknown. She took the box. It was light, but it felt substantial in her hands. It was the first thing she had bought for herself, not for Leo, not for the apartment, but for her, in a very long time. She walked home, clutching the box to her chest like a secret. When she got to her apartment, Leo was already asleep, his textbook spread across the small kitchen table. She sat down, the silence of the room amplifying the beat of her own heart. With trembling fingers, she slowly lifted the lid. What she found inside was not what she expected. It wasn't treasure. It was something far more valuable. The box did not contain jewels or money. There was no secret stash of forgotten cash. At first, Clara felt a small pang of disappointment. A part of her had hoped for a miracle, a movie-like twist where her troubles would magically disappear. But what lay inside was far more intimate and far more mysterious. Nestled on a bed of faded velvet was a small bundle of letters, tied together with a brittle silk ribbon. Beside them lay a single tarnished brass key. It was ornate, old-fashioned, the kind you might see in a fairy tale. Her curiosity piqued. She carefully untied the ribbon. The paper of the letters was thin and delicate, the edges yellowed with age. The ink was faded, written in an elegant looping script that was hard to read. She picked up the first letter. It was dated over 50 years ago. "My dearest Eleanor," it began. The name hit her like a physical blow. Eleanor. It couldn't be. It had to be a coincidence. But as she read on, her skepticism began to melt away, replaced by a growing sense of wonder. The letters told a story, a passionate, heartbreaking story of a forbidden love. They were written by a man named Arthur, a poor artist, to a young, wealthy woman named Eleanor. He wrote of their secret meetings, of the way she lit up his world, of his dreams of a future where their social standing didn't matter. He described her as a woman full of fire and life, a spirit that refused to be caged by her family's expectations. This was not the cold, cruel woman from the diner. This was a different Eleanor, a younger version, one who was capable of great love. Arthur's letters were filled with passion. He wasn't just a lover. He was an artist who saw the world in vibrant color. He wrote about his small cafe, the one he ran to make ends meet while he pursued his art. He described the way the morning light hit the checkered floors, the smell of fresh coffee, the simple joy of serving people. Clara's blood ran cold. He was describing the corner spoon, the very diner where she worked, the very place where she had been humiliated by a woman who shared the same name as the one in these letters. The letters grew more desperate. Eleanor's family had found out about their affair. They had forbidden her from seeing Arthur, calling him a worthless fortune hunter. They were sending her away, arranging a marriage to a man of her own class. The last letter was stained with what looked like tears. "They can take you from me, my love," Arthur wrote, "but they can never take the truth of what we shared. I will leave this box and this key in a place where only a soul not seeking fortune would find it. It is my final act of faith, a belief that one day love will find its way back to you. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Clara sat there, in the quiet of her small kitchen, holding a life in her hands. The story of a love that was torn apart by the very same arrogance and prejudice that had wounded her just hours before. The woman who had hurt her was not just a monster. She was a ghost, haunted by a past Clara was just beginning to understand. And she realized the key in her hand was not just a piece of metal. It was the key to unlocking a 50-year-old secret. The next day felt unreal. Clara went through her shift at the diner in a daze, her mind miles away, lost in the faded ink of Arthur's letters. Every detail of the diner now seemed different. The checkered floor, the worn-out booths, the way the light hit the counter, it was all part of his story. She was no longer just a waitress in a random diner. She was standing on sacred ground, a place where a great love had once blossomed and died. The cruelty of Eleanor Davenport now had a new, tragic context. Clara imagined a young Eleanor, full of fire and hope, being slowly crushed by her family's expectations, marrying for money instead of love, and spending the next 50 years becoming the bitter, cold woman she was today. The woman who threw money at a waitress wasn't just arrogant. She was a prisoner of her own past, lashing out at a world that reminded her of what she had lost. The key felt heavy in her pocket. Arthur's last letter had mentioned a bank, a specific safe deposit box. He wrote that he was leaving everything he had for Eleanor, entrusted to this box, waiting for a day she might be free to claim it. It was a long shot. After 50 years, the box would surely be gone, the contents cleared out. But Clara had to know. During her lunch break, she went to the old downtown bank mentioned in the letter. It was a formidable building, with marble columns and silent, intimidating tellers. She felt small and out of place, the same feeling she'd had when Eleanor walked into the diner. She approached the front desk, her heart pounding. "Excuse me," she said, her voice small. "I know this is a strange request, but I found this key. It belongs to a safe deposit box that was opened here a very long time ago." The bank manager, a stern-looking man named Mr. Harris, looked at her over his glasses, his expression a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. He took the key and the letter she presented. He grumbled about protocol and the passage of time, but something in Clara's earnest face made him check the old records in the vault. He was gone for what felt like an eternity. Clara waited, her hands clenched in her lap. She expected him to return and tell her she was crazy, that the box was long gone. But when he came back, his expression had changed. It was one of utter disbelief. "I don't understand how this is possible," he said, his voice hushed. "According to our records, this box has remained untouched. The fees mysteriously paid every year by an anonymous trust. It's still here." He led her down to the vault, the air growing colder with each step. He used his master key, and then Clara, with a trembling hand, inserted the tarnished brass key Arthur had left behind. The lock clicked. The sound echoed in the silent vault. A 50-year-old whisper finally answered. Mr. Harris pulled open the heavy metal door, and what lay inside would change not just Clara's life, but the life of the woman she thought she hated. The inside of the safe deposit box was not filled with gold bars or stacks of cash. It was filled with paper, old important-looking documents bound in twine. On top of the stack was one final letter, addressed simply to "My Eleanor." With the bank manager's permission, Clara gently lifted it out. The letter was from Arthur, written in his final days. He knew he was dying. He wrote that he had sold a collection of his paintings to a European collector for a sum of money that was, to him, astronomical. He had never touched a penny of it for himself. Instead, he had used it to invest, to build a small fortune, all in her name. "I could not give you my name or a life by my side," he wrote, "but I can give you this, a foundation of your own, a freedom I could never share with you." The documents underneath were the proof. There were deeds to several properties, including the deed to the very building that housed the corner spoon. There were stock certificates, now worth a fortune, and statements for a trust fund that had been growing, untouched, for half a century. Arthur, the poor artist, had died a wealthy man, and he had left it all to the woman who was forced to leave him. He had structured it in a way that it could only be found and claimed through the discovery of the box with the letters, a safeguard to ensure it wouldn't be found by her greedy family. Clara's head was spinning. She held in her hands a fortune, but more than that, she held the final breathtaking act of a man's undying love, and it all belonged to Eleanor Davenport, the woman who had humiliated her, the woman who had thrown $5 at her feet. Clara also learned something else from a quick search on her phone. Davenport Industries, the company Eleanor's husband had built, had recently collapsed in a massive scandal. Eleanor Davenport was not the titan of industry she portrayed herself to be. She was rumored to be on the brink of financial ruin. Her entire life, the silver coat, the designer purse, the arrogant facade, it was all a desperate performance, an act to hide the fact that she was about to lose everything. The diner, owned by her family's trust, was one of her last remaining assets. Clara now had the power to destroy her. With these documents, she could lay claim to the building, evict her, and expose her secrets. She could take the revenge that anyone would say she deserved. She could become the powerful one and make Eleanor the small one. The thought was tempting. It was a dark, satisfying thought. The world would call it justice. But as Clara looked at Arthur's last letter, at the pure, selfless love poured onto the page, she knew that justice and revenge were not the same thing. Clara left the bank with copies of the documents, her mind a whirlwind of conflict. The power she now held was dizzying. She could ruin Eleanor Davenport. She could walk into the diner tomorrow, not as a waitress, but as the person who held the deed. She imagined the look on Eleanor's face, the shock, the fear, the humiliation. It would be a mirror image of what she had done to Clara, a perfect, symmetrical revenge. For a few hours she allowed herself to indulge in the fantasy. She played the scene over and over in her head. She would be calm, cold, and powerful, just like Eleanor had been. She would watch the mask of arrogance crumble and see the desperate woman underneath. It was a tempting poison. That evening, Leo came home from the library, his arms full of books. He saw the look on her face, the turmoil in her eyes. "Clara, what's wrong?" he asked, dropping his books on the table. She didn't know where to begin, but the story tumbled out of her. The humiliation, the $5 bill, the thrift store, the box, the letters, the key, the fortune. Leo listened, his expression shifting from anger on her behalf to utter astonishment. "So, you can destroy her," he said finally, his voice full of awe. "You have all the power." "I do," Clara whispered. "Good," Leo said, his fists clenched. "She deserves it after what she did to you. No one should be allowed to treat people like that. Make her pay, Clara." His words were what anyone would say. They were logical. They were fair. It was the justice of the world, an eye for an eye. But as Clara looked at the old wooden box sitting on her kitchen table, she thought of Arthur. He had suffered a far greater injustice than she had. His love was stolen, his life cut short. Yet his final act wasn't one of bitterness or revenge. It was an act of pure, selfless love. He had built a fortune not to gloat or to wield power, but to offer freedom to the woman he loved, even after she was gone. Could Clara use his gift, a gift born of love, as a weapon of hate? She looked at her own hands. They were the hands of a waitress, calloused and tired, but they were also the hands of an artist. An artist's purpose wasn't to destroy, but to create, to find the beauty and the truth in things, even in the ugliest of situations. To ruin Eleanor would be to become like her, to let the bitterness win, to let the cruelty of the world define her actions, but to do something else, to choose a different path. That would be her own creation. That would be her own masterpiece. She knew what she had to do. It was the hardest decision she would ever make. It was a choice that the world would not understand. It was a choice that defied logic, and even justice. It was a choice born not of weakness but of a strength that Eleanor Davenport had never known. Clara arranged a meeting. She called Eleanor Davenport's lawyer and simply said she had information regarding the property at the address of the Corner Spoon. A meeting was set at a neutral office space. Eleanor arrived flanked by her lawyer, her face a mask of cold suspicion. She clearly expected a lawsuit, blackmail, or some petty grievance from the little waitress she had crushed. She sat down opposite Clara, her posture rigid, her eyes full of disdain. She was ready for a fight. Clara was alone. She had no lawyer. She just had the old wooden box which she placed on the table between them. "Mrs. Davenport," Clara began, her voice quiet but steady. "A few days ago you came into the diner where I work. You said some things that were very hurtful." "You made me feel worthless." Eleanor's lawyer shifted, ready to object, but Eleanor held up a hand, a flicker of curiosity in her cold eyes. "And," she said, her voice dripping with impatience, "what do you want? Money? Is that what this is about?" Clara shook her head. "No." She slid the box across the table. "I want you to have this." Eleanor stared at the box, confused and suspicious. "What is it?" "It belonged to a man named Arthur," Clara said softly. At the mention of the name, the first crack appeared in Eleanor's icy facade. A barely perceptible tremor went through her. Her breath hitched. With trembling hands, she opened the box. She saw the bundle of letters, tied with the faded ribbon. She saw the tarnished brass key. A sound escaped her lips, a soft, wounded gasp. Her lawyer looked on, bewildered. Eleanor untied the ribbon, and her eyes fell upon the familiar, looping script of the man she had loved and lost 50 years ago. She began to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but silent, heartbreaking tears that streamed down her face, washing away decades of bitterness. Clara then told her everything, about the key, the vault, the fortune Arthur had built for her. She pushed the copies of the deeds and the trust documents across the table. "It's all yours," Clara said. "It was always meant for you." Eleanor looked up, her face a mess of tears and confusion. "Why?" she choked out. "Why would you do this for me, after how I treated you?" And this was it, the moment that would define Clara, the shocking act that no one would see coming. "Because," Clara said, her voice filled with a grace and wisdom far beyond her years, "you threw $5 at me and told me to buy some dignity. But dignity isn't something you can buy, Mrs. Davenport. It's something you show. Arthur showed it with a lifetime of love, and the only way I could honor his memory was to show it too. Revenge wouldn't have made me feel worthy. This does." The room was silent except for Eleanor's quiet sobs. In that moment she was not a monster. She was just a woman, stripped of her pride, being handed back a piece of her soul by the person she had tried to destroy. Clara stood up and walked out of the room, leaving the box, the fortune, and the ghost of Arthur behind. She walked out into the sunlight, and for the first time in a long time, she felt light. She hadn't gained a fortune. She hadn't won a victory in the world's eyes, but she had won something far more important. She had found her own worth, not in a crumpled bill on the floor, but in the boundless power of her own character. She was not the poor waitress. She was the artist of her own life, and she had just created her masterpiece. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful life lessons every week.